The night Lagos swallowed his pride, Ji-hoon Kang sat in the back of a black luxury SUV with his hands clasped between his knees, like a man rehearsing a prayer he didn't know how to say. Rain hammered the windows. The driver said nothing. Outside, the lights of the city smeared across the wet road like something beautiful that had been broken and rearranged. He had traveled 6,000 miles to stand in front of a woman he had destroyed, and he still wasn't sure she would look at him. Inside the Hotel Echo ballroom, cameras flashed around the woman of the evening. Amara Johnson Kang, or rather, just Amara Johnson now, stood at the center of it all in a deep rust-orange gown, laughing at something a photographer said, completely at home in her success. She was the cover of Lagos Fashion Week's opening night. She was the headline. She was the story. And somewhere across that ballroom, hidden behind a pillar with a glass of water he hadn't touched, Ji-hoon Kang watched her and understood, for the very first time, exactly what he had thrown away. This is the story of a man who had everything the world told him to want, and the moment he got it, he destroyed the one thing that had made it possible. It started in Seoul, in a small cafe near Hongdae, on a Tuesday morning when Ji-hoon Kang was nobody. He was 27 years old, the founder of a tech startup that lived in a cramped office above a dry cleaning shop, and he had just been rejected by his 14th investor in 4 months. He walked into that cafe looking like a man carrying something invisible and very heavy. He ordered an Americano, didn't look where he was going, and walked directly into a woman sitting by the window, sending a full cup of coffee straight across her open sketchbook. He froze. She looked down at the ruined pages. He started apologizing so fast and so badly that she laughed before she could stop herself. Her name was Amara. She was a Nigerian international student, studying fashion business at Hongik University, working part-time at a boutique 3 days a week to cover her rent. Her sketchbook was full of dress designs, bold, structural, African-inspired silhouettes that didn't look like anything in the Korean fashion world at the time. She was warm and sharp and completely unbothered by the disaster Ji-hoon had just caused. "Buy me another coffee," she said simply, "and we'll call it even." He bought her the coffee. Then he stayed for 2 hours. Then he came back the next Tuesday, and the one after that. What happened between them wasn't dramatic at first. It was quiet. Late-night ramen after her shifts. Her handwriting in the margins of his pitch decks. Little notes, like "be more specific." Here and this part is where you lose them. Fix it. The way she listened when he failed, which was often, without telling him to quit, and without pretending it didn't hurt. 3 weeks after they met, he lost investor number 15. He called her from the stairwell. He didn't even say hello, just, "They passed again." She said, "Come eat. I made jollof rice. The real kind." He came. They ate. She looked at him across the table and said, "One day, Ji-hoon, the whole world is going to know your name," he said. "Only if you stay beside me." She smiled and said nothing, but she stayed. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony with 12 guests. No grand announcement. No media. Just 2 people who had decided that what they had was real enough to protect. What Amara never told him, what she never announced, never used as leverage, never once brought up in an argument, was that during those early months, when the company was gasping for air, she had done things that kept it alive. She quietly used her personal savings to cover 2 months of server costs when Ji-hoon's business account hit 0. She introduced him, through her university connections, to a Nigerian venture capitalist named David Okafor, who became one of their earliest investors. She even sold a gold jewelry set her mother had given her, a necklace and earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, to help cover payroll during a crisis she never even told Ji-hoon was happening. She didn't do it for credit. She did it because she believed in him. That was the kind of woman she was. And then the money came. Ji-hoon's AI logistics platform scaled faster than anyone expected. By the time he was 30, the company had expanded into Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Magazines put him on covers. Business channels called him Korea's youngest self-made tech billionaire. He bought a penthouse in Gangnam. He hired a driver. He wore suits that cost more than what Amara used to pay in rent. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to change. Amara noticed it before he did. The late dinners that became no dinners. The business trips that stretched from 4 days to 10. The way he started answering her questions with one-word responses, like he had run out of time to give her full sentences. She didn't nag him. She didn't cry in front of him. She paused her own fashion dreams, which had been growing quietly since Korea, a small collection she'd been building on weekends, and focused on keeping their home steady, keeping him anchored, being the ground beneath his feet while he climbed. But the ground doesn't get thanked for being ground. The elite circles Ji-hoon now moved in had opinions about his marriage. Not to his face. They were too refined for that. But the whispers moved through those rooms like smoke. Executives at dinners would make comments just loud enough. Online forums lit up with questions about why someone of Ji-hoon's status had married a foreigner. His mother, who had never warmed to Amara, began calling more often, always steering the conversation toward the same unspoken destination. And then Seo Yeon came back. She had been his fiancée years before Amara, from a chaebol family, educated in the United States, polished in the way old Korean money polishes its children. She returned to Seoul for a board appointment and walked back into Ji-hoon's world at a charity dinner, wearing a white dress and looking at him like no time had passed. She was careful. She never said anything cruel about Amara. She didn't need to. Ji-hoon, investors aren't just buying your product anymore, she told him one evening after a board meeting where she'd sat in as a guest. They're buying the image, the whole picture. You understand that, right? He told her he did, and he let her say it again, in different ways, over the following weeks, until it stopped sounding like manipulation and started sounding like advice. Amara came home one evening to an empty apartment that felt different. She couldn't name the difference exactly. But something in the air had shifted, the way the air shifts before a storm that hasn't announced itself yet. She tried to reach him. She made dinner and left it covered for him 3 nights in a row. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said, simply, "I miss you. Can we talk?" The note disappeared. He never mentioned it. Then came the charity gala. It was one of Seoul's most high-profile events. Hundreds of guests. Media presence. The kind of room where reputations were constructed and dismantled between appetizers and the main course. Amara dressed carefully that night. She wore a deep green dress, her hair natural and beautifully done, gold earrings that caught the light. She wanted to stand beside her husband and remind the room, remind him, that they were a unit. She arrived and found him across the room, already deep in conversation with Seo Yeon. When their eyes met, something in his face shifted. Not guilt. Worse. Discomfort. He pulled her aside before the dinner began. They stood near a side corridor, out of earshot, and he spoke quietly, almost carefully, like someone diffusing something. "Amara," he said, "I think we need to talk honestly." She felt her stomach drop. About what? He looked at the floor for a moment. About whether we rushed into this. She stared at him. Rushed into what, Ji-hoon? We've been married for 3 years. Things are different now, he said. The company, the expectations. People are what? She asked. Her voice was very steady. She had gone completely calm the way people go calm when something too large to process arrives all at once. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, across the room, Amara saw 2 executives watching them, and she heard, because the corridor carried sound in a way Ji-hoon hadn't accounted for, one of them say to the other, "A foreign wife doesn't fit the brand." She looked at Ji-hoon. He had heard it too. She could see it in his jaw. He said nothing. He just looked at the floor again. That silence was the divorce. Everything else was just paperwork. When you had nothing, Amara said very quietly, I was enough for you. Now you have everything. And suddenly, I'm an embarrassment? He opened his mouth. She shook her head. Don't, she said. She walked back into the gala, stayed for 40 minutes, so no one could say she fled, said goodbye to the people she liked, and left. 3 days later, she signed the divorce papers. She didn't fight over the settlement, didn't call journalists, didn't post anything on social media. She packed 2 suitcases, called her cousin in Lagos, and left Korea on a Wednesday morning without a press release, without a scene, without giving the people who had whispered about her the satisfaction of watching her break. She left one thing behind, an envelope, unsealed, on the kitchen counter, in her handwriting. Ji-hoon didn't find it for 6 weeks. The collapse, when it came for him, came fast. A year after the divorce, 3 of his major investors pulled out simultaneously over a financial transparency investigation. The company's valuation dropped 40% in 11 days. A former CFO gave an interview that raised questions about the company's early funding structure. Media outlets that had celebrated him turned with the efficiency of weather. And Seo Yeon, who had arrived in his life dressed in promises, left it quietly, by text message, on a Thursday afternoon. I think it's best if we create some distance given everything happening. I'm sure you understand. He sat in the penthouse, the one he had bought to prove something, he couldn't remember what, and did not call anyone because there was no one to call. He had spent 3 years building an image, and no time at all building loyalty. The apartment was very quiet. Then an old employee, a woman named Cha Min-seo, who had been with the company since the 3rd month, came to see him. She was one of the few people who showed up. She sat down and told him something that he would later describe as the moment his chest caved in. She told him about David Okafor, about how Amara had made the introduction, about how, without that funding, the company would have died in its 2nd year. She told him that 2 of the global expansion strategies they'd been credited with had come from conversations Amara had with distributors she met through her own network. She told him about the payroll crisis Amara had solved, quietly without telling him, using money that was not hers to spend. Ji-hoon sat with this for a long time. Then he remembered the envelope. He found it in a box he hadn't opened since the move. The paper inside was folded once. Ji-hoon, I never cared about your money. Not when you had it. Not when you didn't. I only ever cared about your heart. I hope one day you find someone you trust enough to show it. Amara. The man who had not cried at his own wedding, who had not cried when investors rejected him, who had not cried when the stock dropped and the headlines turned. That man sat on the floor of his kitchen and cried for a very long time. Then he made a decision. He found her through a mutual contact, who took 3 weeks and 2 ignored messages to respond. By the time he landed in Lagos, Amara Johnson was no longer a woman he needed to rescue or apologize to quickly before she moved on. She was the CEO of Amare, a luxury African fashion house with stockists in London, Paris, Dubai, and New York. Lagos Fashion Week had made her its opening night headliner for the 2nd year running. He stood at the back of the ballroom and watched her exist in her success, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not admiration, not attraction, not guilt. Shame. Clean, clarifying shame that stripped everything performative away from him and left only the truth of what he had done. She saw him before he could approach her. Their eyes met across the room. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. No shock, no visible emotion, and then turned back to her conversation like someone who had already rehearsed this moment many times and decided in advance how it would go. He waited. After the formal program ended, she found him near the corridor, arms folded, expression careful. You could have called, she said. You wouldn't have answered. She considered this. No, she said. I wouldn't have. They went to a quiet corner of the hotel lounge. He spoke first, and he did not make excuses. He had prepared a speech on the plane and thrown it away somewhere over the Sahara. What came out instead was plainer. I traded love for status, he said, and lost both. I know that's not enough to say. I know there's nothing I can— Ji-hoon, she stopped him. I know what you came to say. Then let me say it. She nodded once. You built me, he said. Not as a metaphor. Actually. You put your money into my company when I was broke. You gave me your network. You sold your grandmother's jewelry. His voice broke on the last word. I didn't know that last part until 6 months ago. I've thought about it every day since. Amara was quiet for a moment. Cha-min seo, she said. Yes. She looked at him carefully. Why are you here, Ji-hoon? What are you hoping for? I don't know how to answer that without it sounding like what I want matters in this conversation. Something moved across her face. Not softness exactly, but recognition. I have a daughter, she said. He stilled. Her name is Ji-yeon. She's 2 years old. She has your eyes and my stubbornness, and she already exhausts everyone around her, which means she's going to be extraordinary. Ji-hoon Kang, who had managed boardrooms and press conferences and financial disasters, had no idea what to do with his face, or his hands, or the next sentence. He said nothing for what felt like a very long time. Why didn't you? Because you had made your choice, Amara said simply. I was not going to use a child to change your mind. That's not what I wanted for her. Or for you. He pressed his hands over his face. When he pulled them away, he didn't bother pretending he wasn't shaken. Can we be a family again? He asked. The words fell into the space between them. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Not with coldness, and not with warmth, but with something more honest than either. Clarity. I forgave you a long time ago, she said. Not for you. For me. Because I refused to carry the weight of your mistakes on top of everything else I was building. She paused. But forgiveness doesn't erase pain, Ji-hoon. And I am not the woman who left Korea. I will never be her again. I'm not asking you to be. Then hear me clearly. She leaned forward slightly. You can be in Ji-yeon's life. You can be her father. Fully, properly, consistently. That is not a small thing. That is the most important thing I can offer you, and you should not treat it like a consolation prize. I won't. If you disappear again, even once, if you let your image, or your business, or anyone's opinion of who you should be with pull you away from that little girl, I will never give you another chance. Not because I'm cruel, because she deserves better than someone who chooses her when it's convenient. I understand, he said. Do you? Yes. He met her eyes. I do. Amara sat back. Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the hotel's tall windows, Lagos glittered, loud and alive and completely indifferent to his reckoning, which was exactly right. She wakes up at 5:30, Amara said. She likes oatmeal with honey and anything that has a face on it. Cups, plates, socks, it doesn't matter. She calls everything she loves mine before she even knows what it is. She paused. She's going to say that about you, Ji-hoon, when she meets you. Mine. That word from her is not small. Don't make her regret using it. He nodded slowly. There was nothing adequate to say to that, and he had enough sense, finally, not to try. The morning after the gala, Ji-hoon stood outside a modest house in Victoria Island, where Amara lived with Ji-yeon and her cousin Tammy. Amara opened the door and stepped aside. A small girl came running across the living room in socks with tiny pandas on them, and stopped 3 feet from the stranger at the door. She looked up at Ji-hoon with enormous brown eyes. He looked down at her. Her face was a rearrangement of everything he recognized in himself, filtered through someone far better. She pointed at him. "Mine?" she asked. Ji-hoon Kang, who had spent a decade chasing the right answer to every question, looked at his daughter and felt the most uncomplicated thing he had felt in years. "Yes," he said. "Yours." Later that morning, Amara watched from the kitchen doorway as Ji-hoon sat on the living room floor and allowed Ji-yeon to place every stuffed animal she owned onto his lap. He accepted each one with complete seriousness. He did not check his phone. He did not look toward the door. He was entirely, simply present. Amara did not smile in the way that means things are fixed. No, smiled in the way that means things are beginning. Carefully, with eyes open, without promises that haven't been earned yet. The billionaire had spent years chasing power and constructing a version of himself he thought the world would respect. He had sacrificed the truest thing he ever had on the altar of other people's approval, and when the altar collapsed, as altars built for the wrong gods always do, he had nothing left but the memory of a woman who had loved him honestly when he deserved it the least. He would not get her back. That chapter was closed, and she had written the final line herself. But he had been given something rarer than a second chance at love. He had been given a first chance to be the father his daughter deserved. And this time, Ji-hoon Kang wasn't going to waste it. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this. We drop new episodes every week. And tell us in the comments, do you think Ji-hoon deserved another chance, or did Amara make the right call? We read every single one,